Hey everybody, how's it going? Really looking forward to being here for another WMJS Jazz Talk. And we have a really special talk tonight. Um, we have several music educators from around the country joining us tonight who will be talking about how COVID has affected their teaching. They'll be talking about ethics and they'll be talking about authenticity in jazz pedagogy. So here they all are. Hey everybody, how's it going?
Hey, Jordan.
Hey, so I'd just like to start with an introduction, and rather than me just babble on about what you guys are all doing, why don't we have you introduce yourselves, starting with Jared.
Thanks, Jordan. I'm Jared Sussink. I am a graduate of Central Michigan University, and I am a band director and jazz director at Garfield High School in Seattle, Washington. And I'm responsible for a jazz program that includes three ensembles, three jazz ensembles, as well as running a concert and symphonic band and our athletic band. And this is my second year at Garfield. I've been in Seattle since 2014, and working in the Central District of Seattle. I was previously at the feeder school, Washington Middle School, which feeds into Garfield, for 3 years prior to coming to this school. So yeah, who's next?
How about Cesar Mendoza?
Hey everyone, my name is Cesar Mendoza. I am one of two directors over at Skokie School District 73 and a half. Yes, a half district, where I teach at two schools, McCracken Middle School and Middleton Elementary, teaching grades 4 through 8 band, 4 bands in the program. Also do lots of sectional work, teaching at an organization in the Chicagoland area called MYA, teaching lessons here in the Chicagoland area. This is my third year teaching at McCracken and my third year just teaching in general. So super happy to be here, super happy to be in this conversation.
Okay, Rufus is next on my screen, so I guess he's next in real life.
Hello, everyone. I am Rufus Ferguson. I do a lot of things, I think, as most musicians do, but I currently serve more in an administration role. I am the Director of Community Partnerships at the Jazz and Creative Institute, signed behind me. I'm also the Education Manager at the Kalamazoo Symphony Orchestra, so I am currently not teaching, but do have some teaching experience. I've taught the adult jazz band here at the Jazz and Creative Institute, as well as private lessons, and I also directed the University Jazz Lab Band and taught applied lessons at Western Michigan University for 2 years before transitioning to an administration role. So that's what I am doing now.
Right on, Rufus. Thanks for being with us tonight. Next, we have Maddie Vogler.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie. I teach at Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois, which is just a little bit north of Chicago. This is my 5th year teaching in general and my 5th year at the school. During the school day, I'm mostly teaching music production classes, and then I run the jazz program. And I have 4 big bands and 3 combos, and I think just over about 100 kids in the program. But yeah, it's high school. So yeah, thank you.
Wow, just 4, huh, Maddie? So last but certainly not least, we have Mike Hammond. Mike, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Mike Hammond, and I teach in Holland, Michigan at West Ottawa Public Schools. I'm one of 4 directors in the band program from 6th through 12th grade. And I'm the lead high school director for both our concert band program as well as the jazz program. I teach our two high school jazz bands that we've got. And then a couple of our middle school directors teach the middle school after school jazz band program.
Very cool. Well, we're here with a really, really incredible panel of educators, and I couldn't be more thrilled to kind of talk to them and connect with them. This was partially kind of a selfish thing because I get to reconnect with all these wonderful people from various stages of my own life. But I just wanted to start out and just say, this COVID-19 pandemic has been very, very difficult on so many levels. But I'm wondering, how has it affected your instruction in your current role? Maddie, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. So we are completely online right now. So the jazz program is operating via Zoom, which has actually led to some pretty fun opportunities. Like it's definitely not what the kids want to be doing. It's not what we want to be doing. We want to be making music in person. But we're trying a bunch of cool stuff. So right now, some of the kids are doing like a Soli project where they're either like composing or arranging for their section, or they're picking like a famous Soli from a chart that they know. We're doing a lot more listening than we normally would. I'm having kids bringing in recordings and showing videos, and that's been a really cool way to like let them kind of show what they're interested in and what's important to them in jazz. So that's been creating a lot of really cool conversations. We've been doing like a lot of call and response. So like I'll get my horn out and just play, and then the kids are muted but they're playing back, and sometimes I'll have like a play along going or a metronome or whatever. So we're just we're just trying to make it happen. Yeah, that's all I got, I guess.
That's great. That's great. Rufus, what are you guys doing over at JCI?
So at JCI, we are currently operating in a hybrid model. A lot of our lessons are taught virtually. There's pros and cons, I think as we all know, but I'm going to focus on the pros for this because one thing that I do appreciate about this pandemic style of teaching, it is forcing us to integrate technology into music, and especially into jazz, which because it's just a historical type of music, everything is taught a lot of times through passing information on from person to person, or transcribing by hand, or teaching in person. A lot of this is forcing us to use technology. So it's not only creating new innovative ways to approach the music, but it's allowing us as educators new and innovative ways to teach the music. So that's a good thing that I really am personally enjoying from this new technology-based teaching. But of course, we are still doing in-person lessons, and all of our ensembles are in person. Of course, safely, but we are doing all in-person ensembles.
Very cool. Jared, have we heard from you yet? I feel like we haven't.
Not on this. Yeah, we're very similar, with Maddie's situation with being remote, call and response in terms of what you're doing over Zoom. We've found, my music department colleagues and I, we've centered our curriculum very much so on music production skills, because I mean, what better time than now to like get every student using Audacity, which is free, and making them record themselves over tracks, and that's a learning curve in itself that we found very hopeful that becomes a standard now in music programs, where learning these skills are incorporated into how we do rehearsals and all of those types of things. We've also really taken advantage of kind of this type of format, doing workshops with artists. We are super fortunate to be funded with a parent organization that has been around in this area for a long time. And we have a workshop next week with Jacob Collier that we're super excited about. So just taking advantage of things that normally we would not get to do if it was normal playing. And I will say not as much emphasis on playing, honestly, not as much emphasis on playing big band music and stuff as normal. But yeah, what a time to be alive, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Well said. Mike, how about you guys at West Ottawa in my own backyard here in Holland, Michigan?
Yeah, actually, I feel incredibly blessed. We're actually in a position where we're able to be face to face with the kids 5 days a week. And so that's been great. We started the year unable to play indoors, which obviously creates some issues, especially at our class meeting time of 6:45 a.m. And so we've been dragging out a network of extension cords and power strips and using stand lights so that the kids can actually see the play. Our administration actually has been very complimentary. They get to hear the kids play every day on their way into work. And so we've gotten some nice comments with that. Obviously, it has made it very challenging for the kids to deal with the elements and whatnot being in that situation. But we've got great kids, and that's been a really wonderful thing of everything that we've dealt with and throughout the entire program is that the kids are being outstanding, dealing with having to have some extra hurdles in their way. But we're now actually able to be inside just this past week. And so there's more of a sense of normalcy as each thing gets added back in to what we're able to do. We're currently actually working on trying to get our tech game together so that we can get you in, Jordan, online virtually, since we can't have you come in physically into the building. But trying to get so that we can get some good sound happening so we can do some playing and you can give us some live feedback as you've done such a great job with in the past. So we're trying to, it's definitely teaching all of us educators how to be massive problem solvers. And so it's sharpening our skills in some different ways than normal.
Yeah, definitely. I think if nothing else, this is a very different manifestation of our creativity as educators. Cesar, what are you guys doing over there in Skokie?
Yeah, so similar to Jared and Maddie, we are completely remote in Hafen for the entire year. And one thing that Chip and I, my coworker, talked about in the early stages of planning is what are some things that we can do now that we wouldn't be able to do in a traditional setting. I think approaching it from that manner was super helpful. Similar to Jared, we have a guest of the week segment where we bring in guests that we probably wouldn't be able to do during the year to talk to the entire program. We have to be pretty quick. And it's hard to retain attention with students on Zoom, and try doing that with fifth graders. I mean, they're bouncing off the walls, and so we have to make sure that we're moving the pace. Every 5 minutes, we're trying to get something new in front of them. And something that we've been doing a lot is having it be mostly student led. We think of ourselves as facilitators and have the students really lead the rehearsals, lead us in exercises and method book lines. And what that does also is that it gets them practicing, because I mean, these kids want to sound good for their peers. It gets them playing, gets them on their horn more. Along with the technology stuff, something that we usually don't do, but we bought Soundtrap subscriptions for every kid in the program. And so every kid has access to Soundtrap. Now, we're not doing too much music technology production work yet. It's mostly for kids recording themselves playing a duet together, playing a duet with another friend. But the cool thing about offering that Soundtrap subscription to every kid is that kids are very explorative, and they're going to go ahead and dig in and come up with stuff. Like I'll get an email like, "Hey, Mr. Mendoza, like check out this song I just made." I'm like, Milo, like where did this come from? So it's super cool to offer kids these tools and see what they do without our guidance. And it's a pretty neat thing.
That's very cool to hear. And I so admire all of you who are out there, just doing the thing every day with these students, the future of not only our country, but the future of the music. And I love that you guys are facilitating their music making. Let's talk listening for a second. What are you listening to with your students? Like what has been like a favorite of maybe each of your classes? I know, Maddie, you said you had been doing more listening lately. So what are your students listening to?
Yeah, so kids have just been bringing in random videos. They're just like going on YouTube and pulling up whatever. I got a couple kids that got like way deep into Sonny Rollins, and that was like a big hit for a long time. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of like the Tiny Desk jazz concerts that are more like duo trio type stuff, and the audio quality is like really awesome, and like everything looks really nice. I think that's been a lot of kids have been bringing that in, and we've kind of been talking about and there's just a lot of interaction that happens in those, so we've been talking about that a little bit, but it's just been a rotating cast of different types of things. So
Very cool. Hey, Jared, what are your students listening to? I know you said you have like Jacob Collier coming in, but I mean, how do high school students get hip to him? Like yeah, what's going on there?
Well, they get hip to him because they are on social media, and Jacob's got his social media game is up there. Uh, no, I mean, as far as just fundamentally as a program, Comp AC Duke Ellington on repeat, pick an album, sit on it for a while. Specifically Basie, we've got a lot of students that have been playing Basie since middle school, so like that's like a household name. Um, similar to Maddie, like Maddie, they just bring in stuff. I got a couple students that got really hooked on Maria Schneider's album that she just put out, called Data Lords, that is like blow your mind. Which is cool to have like high school students getting into that kind of stuff that, typically even some college. Jordan, when you and I were in undergrad, I don't know, like some of my students, I'm like, man, you're way more mature than I was when I was in college. But yeah, it's kind of similar. It's just a mixed bag of things, but we always stick to our roots. A lot of Duke Ellington. We do the Essentially Ellington competition pretty frequently out here in Seattle, so that's like a huge part of our curriculum, jumping into that stuff.
So we've got a great question from one of our incredible viewers here, Dr. Paul Brewer, who formerly taught at Aquinas College. And he says, in all my years as a jazz educator, Paul, I'm going to abridge your comment here a little bit, adjudicator and clinician, the continuing problem I encountered was the lack of jazz history knowledge and improvisational skills among high school students. That's not to say, however, that I didn't hear some superb jazz improvisers at this level, and that those who did have a good knowledge of jazz history, but these students were the exception and not really the rule. My question to any or all of you is, what approaches do you use in the teaching of jazz history and jazz improvisation with your middle school and high school students?
I feel like I guess I can go first. I think that the history can be taught through the music if you know the music. I think one of the issues in jazz education is that a lot of college prep programs, a lot of colleges don't prepare educators to teach jazz, just in general at all. So it takes a commitment for jazz educators to realize that if you've been gifted with the opportunity to teach jazz, which I say that specifically because a lot of educators get jazz dropped on their plate when they take a job and they're like, I have no idea what to do. I take that, that's a gift to be given that opportunity to teach this music, but you have to know the music yourself. And so a lot of it's the directors knowing the music and having some stories in their back pocket to connect to an era or connect to a specific piece. You can teach the history just through describing how a piece would have been used in a setting. If you're playing Ellington, like talking about people would dance to this music and like recreate that environment for them. Those are things that when I was teaching middle school, that's how I got students hooked on the music. And then as far as like actually teaching the history, I wouldn't say I teach a lot of history, like doing history lessons. I think the students just start to listen to the music and they connect dots on their own. I had an 8th grader that walked into class one day with the Miles Davis autobiography, which I don't know if that's appropriate for an 8th grader to read, if you've ever read it, but that's kind of just been my experience.
Yeah, that's great. Mike, I saw you unmute. So how about I'll give you the ball next here.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Jared. I think that at least most of what I do with the history aspect is to try to link it up to the literature that we're doing. I think that choosing literature from a variety of different eras of jazz is a good way to, be purposeful about that. And then as far as for improv, I think the biggest thing is just if you want the kids to learn how to do it, you got to spend the time on it. And I feel that, at least I'll speak for myself, early on, I felt ill-equipped to teach the method. And so I think that there was probably the natural avoidance of, well, if I don't feel like I've got this set program figured out, if I don't have my curriculum completely figured out, I'm not spending as much time on it. And so as time went by, I realized, I'm shortchanging my students. So I've got to dive in and did tons of research and brought in excellent people like you, other folks. And then from I think one of the biggest success things in trying to develop our improv program is to have just some real small, it's like most things in life, small achievable goals for the kids, because I feel like, again, early on, a lot of what I did was kind of throw a lot of things at the kids that were maybe a little bit nebulous. But now it's gotten real specific, like, okay, I want you to do a course tomorrow and just use exclusively chord tones so that you get those mile markers down. And then let's talk about doing, specifically modes. And then maybe another time, think more conceptually about, okay, now can you tell a story, or can you include a lick from a transcription that we've been learning in class together as a group that we've been listening to. So having just a small thing so that the kids don't feel like, well, hey, I've got to be a great improviser by Tuesday. But there's something that I can actually do and feel like I'm successful at that.
If I can jump in, Jordan.
Yeah, you bet, Rufus. Absolutely, man.
I think one of the main issues in jazz education at every level is that we have minimized it to a classroom. That's not what this music is about. A lot of jazz educators, a lot of times not by any fault of their own, have learned this music in the classroom and through records and through transcriptions, and that's fine and well. But this music comes from the people. This is a cultural music. I didn't grow up in an educated music society. I did that after the fact. But I grew up going and listening to jazz musicians, talking to jazz musicians, learning the language. We didn't learn how to play Joe Henderson's, solo by reading it. We listened to that record, and then we talked to people. One of the big things I love to do even now is talk to some of my friends that I play with. I had the pleasure of playing with people like Rodney Whitaker and Bob Hurst and Ollie Jackson, and most recently I played with all three of them actually. And one of the big things they talk about, and we all know Rodney is one of the the pioneers of amazing jazz education. I mean, MSU is a top-notch program, and one of the big things he does is make sure that his students are in a sense submerging themselves in the culture, because this music goes outside of the notes, it goes outside the articulations, it goes outside the rhythms. This is about the culture, this is about the language, this is about the history. And it doesn't really matter how much of the musical aspect you learn if you don't understand and respect the soul and the heart in which this music comes from and the people that it comes from. In my opinion, you will never really understand the music.
Preach, Rufus. Drop that mic. Drop that mic, brother.
Yeah, well said.
So I was reading this book called What Is This Thing Called Soul? And we were lucky enough to have Dr. Damani Phillips last year as one of our guests. And that really changed my approach to teaching the music in the collegiate setting. And of course, I came up, one of the best things that ever happened to me as an educator was Jerry Allen's Sunday Salon. And that was very memorable, being there with, with her students and the people who were playing with her students, just, being around her was a transformational And I know this might sound like a little cliched, but it was a magical experience for me. So yeah, Rufus, yeah, that's beautiful. You know, learning the community. Yeah, the music was not conceived in a vacuum, so why would you ever learn it in one, right? Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have any comments on, you know, teaching the history of the music, teaching improvisation? That previous question from our good friend Doc Brewer.
I was just going to add, because this is very Seattle's a very progressive area. Teaching, you know, Black Lives Matter isn't like a out here, like it's incorporated in schools. So we teach it, and so I just think I encourage any educators out there, like we are in a moment where like this music is so appropriate to talk about, and dig into some of the issues of some of the things in the music that, you know, might have in previous decades not been something that was brought into the classroom, but like the kids are I think, you know, you got to know for yourself, but I think a lot of the kids are ready to dig into some tougher conversations around the music. So there's that aspect too.
Yeah, and you know, to that comment of being ready, and I promise I will not talk as much as this, but to that comment of being ready, you know, the first time I experienced racism was when I was 4 years old. And so if we as people of color are old enough at 4 or younger to experience racism, then other kids are ready to, they should be ready to talk about it. And that, you know, I think goes back to our system of education. Speaking of our system of education, 'cause I'm not going to lose this Black Lives Matter train of thought, but I want to take it back because I think I might, hoping that I have some of my music ed students watching here. Um, and I would just like to ask you guys. So Jared, you mentioned that there aren't a lot of, you know, there's not a lot of preparation for educators who are going to go out and teach the music. And so I'm wondering if any of you have some advice for pre-service music educators who may or may not find themselves in the place where they might teach this music. What do they need to know? What is, you know, what is your kind of hallmark advice here?
I can jump in. I think, I mean, you're never gonna learn it all, and no one can. And that's part of like why it's so amazing. But I think like you have to start, and you have to start soon. And I think um you know, like when you get in a space with kids, they can see, like they just want you to be learning, they want you to be trying. And if you're doing that along with them, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think you do need to have an understanding of where you are at with your own personal understanding of the music. So if you like, you can't turn a blind eye to the things that you don't know. You have to go out and seek people who do know those things. So that could be local musicians, that could be other teachers in your area. But you need to be willing and to look for those, seek out those people, and be willing to ask for help, because people want to give it. People want you to teach jazz well. People want the history of this music, and just all the great things that come along with it to be thriving in, you know, public, any school really. And people will help you. People will be more than willing to help you for sure. But I think that's like the best advice that I think I can give. Just start as soon as possible, and then ask for help.
The
Yeah,
journey
right
of a
on.
thousand miles begins with a single step, right? Oh, Mike, were you going to say something? Did I interrupt you, man?
Uh, no, I was just gonna
Oh,
echo
Cesar. Yeah, thank you.
Maddie's sentiment, and that is to ask questions, talk to people that are doing the thing, talk to people that are teaching jazz, talk to local musicians. We really have to not be afraid of being vulnerable. Right, we're all teachers, and we all do this because we love to learn. And if we grew up not playing a lot of jazz, if we grew up not playing in a jazz ensemble in college, and all of a sudden we get here to student teaching, it's like, oh shoot, I have to go ahead and teach jazz. Well, that's fine. We're right there, and you have to be able to ask questions, be able to be open to learning. Uh, listen a lot to a wide variety of music. Listen to lots of jazz, transcribe, because if you transcribe, and you don't have to transcribe an entire Coltrane, Woody Shaw, Fontana solo. Transcribe like a bar or two. Transcribe it 8 bars. That'll help you with articulation, which is it's huge. Transcribe a bass line, 8 bars. That'll teach you about how to walk and navigate chords. Same thing with guitar and piano players. Learn a groove on drums. It's all about just being super open about learning, and being able to ask those questions to your cooperating teacher or to other people that are around you. I think surrounding yourself, at least I love to do this. I'm surrounded by people that know way, way, way more than me, and that's how we all just keep on learning.
And I think that part of that as well is, if you're completely new to the business, ask around to the people in your area who've been around for a long time. Like, okay, like who are the really great jazz educators, either at the K-12 level or at the collegiate level? Who should I be talking to? Who should I ask questions? I've got my group of people that are my resources that I go to for various things. And so feel like for myself early on, I wasn't always sure who to go to for some things, and I was probably too embarrassed, frankly, to go to them, because I kind of thought I was supposed to know everything, even though I knew I was like pitifully far in the other direction. The other thing that I would add in is I would suggest get out and listen as much as you can. Find out what those great groups are. And at this point in time, there's not a lot of live music going on, but check things out on YouTube, like the Essentially Ellington program and whatnot. And I remember my early days, even just as a concert band director, going to a state music conference and going, wow, okay, so that's what my band's supposed to sound like. Okay. Now, a lot may go into that. Maybe it's a lot different situation and the program is more well developed, but at least if you have a target, I think for me, what was most invigorating, and it's that great thing about music, is that that's possible. So if I heard that someone was able to do that maybe if I commit myself, to learning enough, if I ask enough questions of the right people, take enough, workshops and grad classes, whatnot, on jazz pedagogy, maybe I could help my kids to do that. And I feel a responsibility to try to do that. If somebody else is doing it, there's got to be a way to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, what Mike said is exactly right. One thing I always say to my students is, if you want to be a great French chef, you don't go to the guy who owns the French restaurant in Kalamazoo. You go to France. I mean, that's how you're going to get amazing at it. I mean, you can be good at it, if you learn from the guy down the street. But if you really want to understand the food and the culture and the people it comes from, you go to where it's at. And the same with the music. It's easy for us educators, and I've been guilty of it as well, especially after I kind of got into more of the academic side of this music, of learning from other academic people. But I think a big part of it is, as educators, we should just go to the clubs, talk to the real jazz musicians. We all know how to teach, so we don't need to learn how to teach. We just need to learn the music. And so in that instance, learn it from the actual musicians. Put your own spin on how you want to approach this music. I mean, that's the good thing about this music. There is a path, but it branches off so many different ways, and so everyone can approach it in a different way. But it's easy to create a bunch of copies of each other if we all just keep listening to each other. And if there's this academic way of doing things, and then I'm learning from other academic people, it's a rabbit hole that can eventually, in a sense, diminish the quality of the music. So I think it's important for us to just make sure that we stay connected to the people of the music, the real players, the people who are out there gigging night after night after night. because they just have a level of comfort with this music that as educators sometimes we won't have, because if you get done teaching, you don't always want to go gig night after night after night. So
Anybody else? Did I hear somebody on?
I was
Yeah,
just
there you
gonna
go.
add, out here in Seattle, we all us jazz educators, we read the same Bible, and that Bible is the Count Basie Orchestra. um, and the concepts of teaching swing, but also a lot of the emotion that you find in the music. I have found using Sammy Nestico arrangements. Um, there's a tune called Hay Burner that I introduced to my middle school band, and literally just that one piece took that group to a level that, like, if you had heard them at the beginning of the year, you wouldn't have recognized the band, because the music sounds almost, it's so playful, and one of my colleagues describes it almost like cartoon like music, like it could fit into a cartoon sometimes because it's so playful and joyous, and just it's so fun to play. So if you're someone who's just not super familiar with jazz, I always just recommend to people, like, diving into the Count Basie library can give you a really strong foundation for, like, understanding concepts of swing and, like, what the rhythm section's supposed to be doing, because it's pretty simple in theory, it's hard in practice. It's actually really hard to play really good quarter notes on a cymbal, but, like, it's a great place to start. So just from a practical advice, like, go check out the Sammy Nestico library, if you're getting into this and you want to start with students.
I do want to add one thing. One thing I found that I like to do with my students, well, used to like to do with my students, is aside from Basie, which Basie and Duke, which I think everyone understands are kind of like the kings of the swing band area. But a lot of people forget about Quincy Jones. I mean, his arranging and his writing really epitomizes swing to a point, almost sometimes more than even Basie and Duke. I mean, they would swing hard, and a lot of people forget about those charts because they just think, oh, Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson. It's like, no, Quincy Jones is actually a serious jazz writer. He understands the music. So, for any educators out there, a lot of times we just kind of get stuck with the J.W. Pepper, whatever they give us. And a lot of those Quincy Jones arrangements aren't on there, but do some homework. They're out there, or find someone to try to transcribe it. But I would definitely suggest for educators, especially in high school, dig into some Quincy Jones big band records and writing, and watch your band really kind of move to a different direction outside of the Basie Duke sound.
I just have to mention Garfield is Quincy Jones' alma mater. He's class of 1950. So, yeah, Quincy Jones all the way. It's not just Thriller, people. I dig his stuff from the 80s personally. But, yeah, anyways. We could talk all day about Quincy Jones. We won't go there.
Yeah, since we're talking about literature, so when we're teaching middle school jazz ensembles, like Rufus was saying, we can get just stuck with, like, the stock J.W. Pepper charts put out, but we'd be really doing a huge disservice to our students if the only piece of Latin music they played is called El Taco Picante, like spicy taco or something. Like, that's such a huge disservice to kind of put it as an umbrella as Latin music. Is it a bossa, rumba, mambo? What are we playing here? Mike Rubio has a great collection of watered down Thad Jones arrangements that really keep the essence of the Thad Jones sound. And there's grade 2, 2.5, 3 that can be played with middle school jazz ensembles. Mike Tomorrow has a bunch of arrangements of standards, and that's trying to get kids playing music from the source, from the big band library, Thad Jones library, at a middle school level, playing standards written by all types of jazz musicians and arranged in different styles. It's a great way to expose kids at that young age to that music, and not just having play these stock charts that sound the same if you go ahead and just pull them from the file cabinet, for sure.
So let's talk for a second about those stock arrangements. Let's talk about Spicy Taco, or whatever that is. I think actually I've heard of one they all have these goofy names. But when you're teaching middle schoolers, what do you find is the kind of the what are your what specifically is the disservice that's done to your students when you choose repertoire that is not from the source, and how do we define that? Like, what do you listen for? Like, what is this? It, does that mean that everything on JW Pepper is garbage? Like, what are we talking about? Because that's a major resource for so many educators. So like, where do we differentiate this? Where do we draw the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to draw a hard line. If you really want to get down to the gritty of it, if you look at every piece, I'm sure you can find a purpose to serve. Like, I'm on a time crunch. I need to, my principal, I have to play at the pep rally or whatever. I need to put together this piece, boom. And just pick something out and you play it. And then that serves its purpose. But if we're talking about how to teach this music authentically, or then I really think it does mean to do a little bit more homework. You know, if you introduce your students at the middle school level to a piece like Spicy Taco, and that's like the only in Skokie, Illinois, and that's the only representation they have of Latin music, then I think that is a disservice, because there is so much music that we can be showing them. Now, is this music that they have the ability to play? Maybe, maybe not. If you can go ahead and arrange some piece for them, but also just a mere exposure of having them listen to the music. If Spicy Taco is the only song in your library, then cool, play it. But we have to let the students know, hey, this is not Latin music. We have to expose them to the source of where the music is coming from.
And I want to add, I have a very like firm philosophy that in jazz, especially like middle school, people often say like, well, I need something easy. Like when I'm on my community forum pages for band directors, like I'm in a school and the jazz program's new, so I need like easy charts. And it's like, that's where I think a lot of people go to JW Pepper and they're like, grade 1.5, Spicy Taco, cool. I'm gonna, that's it. But it's like, tunes, even if you get a watered down arrangement of a riff tune, which there are so many you could pick from, like take C Jam Blues. You can get like Mark Taylor's arrangement or someone's arrangement of that tune that's going to be really watered down, but you can make the students reference the original recording. And then that's what's going to get them to playing the stuff that we might say is like the legit library or whatever we want to call it. And similar, like Quincy Jones, like there's a tune called Pleasingly Plump. It's a ballad. Like there are things in every single ability level that you can be playing what we would consider more authentic music that fits what we're after.
Yeah, I think something to consider too is one thing, so just to go off this like Latin music being horribly represented on JW Pepper, which it is. Like you just like go on there and do a search and read the descriptions, it is horrifying. Someone needs to go in there and fix it. Like it's seriously shameful. But one place that I've been checking out, 32 Music Publishing, they have really great, they have some stuff for more like beginner intermediate, and then they also have like full range professional charts of like just like the big Latin jazz ensembles, Afro Latin groups. So check that out. 32 Music Publishing. That's a good place. It's a good place to like send your money. If we're gonna be like getting into like the ethics of this. But that's a good place to check out. And then another thing to consider, especially for like the middle school group, is like if you are able to commissioning a piece from a local musician in your area, because it is sometimes hard to find stuff for younger groups, and that can be a good way of getting your money to the right people who are informed in the music, and just like giving the money to the people who are making the music. And then also you can have them come in, work with the kids. Like that would be a great experience. So that's something to think about, if that's an option for you. And I don't know that it is, but that's always something to think about.
Wow, Maddie, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was literally going to say the exact same thing. But Yeah, I mean, we could always talk about like a cultural appropriation of this music, and I mean that's a conversation that we may need to just do later. Um, but yeah, what Maddie said is right. I mean, there's a lot of educators live in areas where there are jazz programs. You know, contact some of those jazz students. A lot of those seniors and juniors or grad students. You know, it gives them the opportunity to be writing, you know, music, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of get it from people who understand the language, maybe a little bit more than J.W. Pepper or even some of our, you know, us, in a sense. But I think it's important when we're trying to find music for our students. I always try to do two things. One, can I find the record for this? Like, and I'm not talking about like the MP3 on the site. Like, can I get this? Like, can you go listen to a record and understand this music? If you can't, we're just probably not gonna. There you go. That's it. That's it right there. You know, that's the way I try to approach it. Because in a sense, you don't want to take this music outside of where it really is. And a lot of times when you create these J.W. Pepper charts or whoever, it's not even just their own publishing company. A lot of these companies they do their best to introduce the music, but they only introduce it from one viewpoint. So I think it's important that the students not just learn the music, but learn the language, which brings me to my second point of if we're going to give them big band charts, try to use big band charts that are built from standards, so that they're not only learning the chart, but now they can learn, you know, some of the language. Because you know, realistically, how many big bands do you know out here? You know, but if we can get them to learn the standard and okay, let's break out a quartet. Now they're learning the actual music, and it'll kind of push them to learn to understand the culture and everything else behind it. But if we keep them in a, you know, at least from in my experience, if we keep them in this, you know, big band shelter, you know, a lot of times they don't really go outside of that. And then when they, you know, get to, you know, college, or well, there's big bands in college, but post college, there's not many, you know, surviving. And a lot of the language and history is just not learned in those settings for multiple reasons.
Yeah, you just mentioned like buying physical records. I started buying vinyl like 4 years ago, and that fundamentally changed my life. Mostly not because it's like hip and like this like new resurgence of people. I'm not trying to like be a, you know, liberal hippie over here, but like reading the liner notes, like while you're sitting there listening, totally changes the experience. So definitely recommended.
You know, Jared, if you're going to be a hippie, just own it, man. Just own it.
All right.
So, all right, let's go there, Rufus. Not just Rufus. Let's talk about cultural appropriation. And I feel like this is a conversation that music ed needs to have. I feel like it's being had, but yeah, let's talk about that. So there was a few years ago, and it might have been last year, all of this is blurring together. Time is blurring together. Um, so there is this dude named Larry Clark who wrote a lot of beginner string arrangements, and he decided that he was going to go ahead and publish some arrangements of Japanese folk songs and some original compositions and publish them under the name of a Japanese woman. Now, pseudonyms have been used by composers for a really long time, but typically they're used by underrepresented composers or so-called underrepresented composers to try to disguise their music. Uh, it's done a lot to disguise the music of women, to increase sales. So speaking about cultural appropriation, I think that's something that we would find a lot in this music. And I think obviously what Larry Clark did was completely deplorable. But maybe we have some more cultural appropriation kind of within our ranks. I don't know if you guys have heard of there's a piece called, I can't remember the exact title, but I think it's called like Africa, Land of Fire, or something like that, Fire and Ritual, maybe. Um, and it's this huge, it's this concert band piece that utilizes so-called like exoticism and African sounding things, but it doesn't respect the cultures that are being studied. And it's not a respectful representation. It's not by a representative from that culture. So I guess I have two questions. First question, where do we find that here in, where do we find that in this music? Number one, let's just start there, because I will be the first to own my identity as a non-Black jazz musician. And so I mean, my community is not the origin point for this music. So then do I just go and hang up my saxophone? Like what do we do? Like and you know, the thing that I have done is to go straight to the source and to, you know, and to investigate. But where do we find cultural appropriation in music education, in jazz education particularly? Where might we find that?
Man, who wants to go first? It's heavy, man. I guess I turned my mic on, so I'll talk for like a second, but I don't want to take up a lot of space. I think that you know, action versus intent. Uh, I think music education is fundamentally broken in the United States. I think to talk about cultural appropriation in jazz is to also talk about cultural appropriation just in general in society. It's for me, it's heavy. I just had a conversation yesterday with my colleague about it, who actually thinks, you know, very differently about whether or not you can even appropriate certain things, like, you know, when we're talking about music. So I know it's a conversation, people probably have different opinions, but like, yeah, I think we need to take a hard look at our institutions, because jazz has been institutionalized. And so just being cognizant, if you're someone who's studying the music right now, you should be questioning everything. You know, I think with education, you should constantly question everything that you're getting told, even by us, you know? So I think just being more willing to like not be willfully ignorant of your surroundings is a start.
I think one way to mitigate a level of cultural appropriation is to have cultural competence. I think it's important to understand the culture. I mean, it's it's one thing to it's one thing to write a jazz piece and you don't really understand the music. It's another thing to be able to write a jazz piece. You understand the music to a degree, but you don't understand the culture. Right? Like this music, like you said, wasn't built in a vacuum. It wasn't built in the four walls of a big institution. It has a history. It has a lineage. Understand the history, understand the lineage. Jazz didn't start with jazz. Jazz grew out of blues. The blues grew out of gospel. Gospel grew out of field songs. Field songs grew out of, music from enslaved people. You got to understand the language and the history and the lineage of this music before you can really try to tackle speaking this language. I think because one of the biggest mistakes that I think we did in the jazz community is called jazz is American music. It's not American music. It's Black American music, and that's exactly where it comes from. And there's a history there that you have to understand, because America's experience is not Black America's experience. And if you don't understand that experience, you will never understand the music.
Um, I think something to also think about is like this idea of like whitewashing in the music. So like and I this is not the right statistic, but I want to say it's like 90 or 95% of music educators in the country are white. So those are the people who are teaching jazz to kids. Um, and like that tells you a lot about what's probably happening. Um, but then beyond that, again, like we've been talking about, like what's the music that you are playing and talking about with your kids? Are you representing the artists of this music in your classroom? Like, is that what you are bringing to the front of what's happening? I think also this idea of like like academic jazz versus like where it's actually coming from. So like I think a lot of music educators just want the like secret to the music. So like, ah yes, I've like learned the bebop scale, and you know, now I can, you know, like that is my one thing that I know, and I'm going to teach the kids the bebop scale, and now we're doing jazz. And I think every time you kind of like hang your hat on theory, you're losing, you're white in some ways, you are whitewashing what this music is, and in the ways that you're teaching it as well. um so I think I don't know, I just kind of rambled a little bit, but
Preach,
yeah.
no. This is an oral music. It's not going to work if you're trying to read it, if you are not familiar with it. So, yes.
All right. Since nobody's jumping in, I'm going to add one more thing. So I'm going to give an example to kind of qualify what I said and what these other educators are saying. One of the tunes in jazz that a lot of people will play is maybe Down by the Riverside, right? You'll hear people play this, especially in younger bands. They have charts for it and whatnot. But a lot of people don't understand, well, that music, before it was a jazz tune, it was done a lot in second line. Well, what is second line? Where does second line come from? What is the point of second line? What is there second line? Then what's the first line? Like there's all these questions you need to ask that you need to kind of understand this song. And then before, it made its way to New Orleans, it was, a field song. So what did it sound like when enslaved people were singing this in the fields? What is it? Is it just a jazz song? No, like it's also played in the black gospel church quite often. What does it sound like when gospel musicians play this, right? So there's just so much, there's levels to this music that we call jazz that has to be understood. And it's not just jazz. You kind of have to understand black music to understand jazz.
Any other comments along these lines?
I want to just say, like, as a white man, um, to other white men out there, if you're listening, or just white people in general, like, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Um, don't not approach this music because of some of the things we just said that you might feel like, well, I don't know any of that, so like I shouldn't even like part of what we need to do as white people is to deal with this idea of cultural appropriation is to look at our implicit biases, and to, someone said earlier, like, you need to want to know more about other cultures. There's such deep, like, when you, yeah, like talking about jazz, like, you, there's so many things, there's so many like layers of the onion. But don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to explore it. If you make mistakes, just be willing to own that. I've made plenty of mistakes. I have played Spicy Taco, I'm sure, with one of my bands at some point, in the beginning of my career. So,
And I know it seems like we're hating on Spicy Taco a lot, but I feel like Spicy Taco we're kind of using to represent a certain concept. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Um, you know, maybe we're not trying to hate on Spicy Taco so much. Maybe we're just trying to like illustrate a particular kind of tune that is, I don't know, maybe we'll call it school jazz or educational jazz, if you will. Um, yeah. So in these academic programs, and I teach in one. So like I am fully fully aware of this. But like what if we have if we have a system where, yeah, I think Jared said we've institutionalized the music. That might have been Jared, that might have been somebody else. Anyway, we've institutionalized the music. So how do we I read this article in the New York Times or maybe the New Yorker, that said, that, you know, jazz has been the music of Black resistance. Can it meet this moment? How do you, as educators, see your role in, you know, in preparing tomorrow's musicians, preparing tomorrow's audiences, preparing tomorrow's free thinking, critical thinking, creative individuals? How do we as educators move the music toward that moment, or at least move the music within our sphere of influence toward that moment? Is that even what we want to do?
I just real quickly want to say, you know, the first thing that popped in my head, Jordan, is uh, a lot of jazz programs. The stat that Maddie said about you know, how many jazz educators are white also applies to how many jazz students are white in a lot of these institutions, and also how male dominated it still is. So for me, you know, I'm so heavily focused on gender and racial diversity, and for me, like, that also makes me look in the mirror and go, is having 3 jazz ensembles at my school the best use of my FTE or whatever? Or should I be looking at, you know, if I'm not getting the Black population of my school to want to play jazz, is there something else that's in the spirit of Black American music that I can bring to my program to forward everything, you know? Because I'm not saying like, oh, we should stop teaching jazz, we just teach hip hop. But like, we also need to realize that like teaching jazz, if we're trying to do it in 2020, like, we need to bring in some of those contemporary influences to try to widen our demographic of students.
Yeah, I think when we share music with students, it can, if we're just talking in broad music education terms, it can, since since like the statistic I was brought up earlier about white music educators, it can get very easy. White composers are there's plenty of them, so many, and it can be so easy to just fixate on those, and that's the only type of music that our kids play. But diversifying the type of composers, Black, Indigenous, people of color, there's so many composers, musicians. A lot of the musicians that we show to our kids are white, but there are many musicians of color that are great, phenomenal at their instruments. We don't see them represented in orchestras, so our kids are probably going to be like, oh, maybe that's not for me. But we have to expose them to those players. We have to expose them to that music, and if we don't do that, then you know, a kid might just fall off, and we have no idea why. But we have to take responsibility to expose kids to that music, to expose kids to those types of musician. If I'm sure a lot of us are probably guilty that the only Black musician that students will see as a guest, it will be on their jazz program. All right. And I think that's, I mean, it's great that we're bringing in Black musicians to play there, but there are a bunch of great Black classical composers, great women composers. All right. When we go ahead and just narrow it down into, and the only person that we're bringing into the program that's of color and just playing jazz, we're really saying that we're kind of negating everything else. So I think we have to be at least aware, and we have to make an effort to you know, show kids that there's more to music than just white people.
Yeah, I mean, representation is key. I mean, um, I can only imagine if I would have gotten into jazz had I grew up where I live now. I mean, I see a lot of jazz musicians, but none of them are Black. You know, a big part of why I got into it is because I saw myself in it. You know, a lot of the people that I would see on Sunday mornings in the church, I'd also see on Saturday night at the jazz club. You know, and it kind of like, oh, cool, I'll try both of these. You know, um, but I do want to address kind of what you said in the first part of that question, Jordan, about kind of the relevance of jazz education, because I think it's important for us to not just stick jazz into this bubble of 1930 to 1970 or 80 or 90. I mean, there's jazz music happening now, and a lot of the music that is happening now, yes, you know, there were pieces, you know, written in the 60s. You know, you have Alabama, you have a lot of them that address those social issues, you know, but there are social issues that are happening now that, you know, jazz musicians are addressing now. Now, a lot of this music may not be able to be played by, you know, there's no big bands really doing this stuff, and there's not charts of this at this time, you know, written from this stuff, because this is just, music is so new. But then again, that kind of goes back to understanding, just learning the language of the music. Yeah, it may not be a chart for it. Oh well, listen to it, understand the language, understand the music. Why did he write this? You know, which, you know, side note, Joe, which is kind of why I'm so glad that we're working on the project that we're going to be working on, because, you know, it's addressing the issues that are happening in this world today. Um, and I think it's important that we not only introduce music to our students that are addressing those things, but talk about these issues with our students. You know, this is one of the things that we did here at Jazz and Creative Institute during the summer camp that we had to last year. You know, we had an hour block every day where we talked about the social issues that was represented in the music. So I think it's important that we bring these things to our students, because um, again, this music comes from a disenfranchised people, and so there's a level of pain, there's a level of hurt, there's a level of agony, despair, hopelessness that is in this music. Yeah, it sounds swinging and good, but a lot of these things weren't just written to be swinging and good. They come from a place. And I think, again, you do a disservice to the music if you don't understand the place that it comes from, not only location wise, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally.
A little side thing that I'd like to throw in, or I guess connected to it, is you'd mentioned, Jordan, you know, kind of where are we hoping for our students to take the music? And I think we would all hope that our kids would sense it at its core that they each have a voice that's worth being heard. And if we can develop that through the vehicle of expression through jazz, then, you know, for many of us, like I know most of my students aren't going to major in music, so they're not going to go out and have a jazz career. But in their circle of influence, if they've got that confidence to know that, you know, they have a voice that's worth hearing, because they've spent the time trying to educate themselves on a topic, not just to speak out because, you know, they have a mouth, but if they've done the research and they've gotten themselves educated, then maybe they can contribute a voice that can help people in a positive way.
I want to add one thought just on like thinking about the future of music education and kind of where things might be going. Just to any educators out there listening, you know, we have to collectively challenge the white, as was said, you know, the whitewash sort of white normative way that we teach music, and not just jazz, but like band. If your focus is on the adjudicated festival and that's your year to year, like you wake up, get out of bed and prep for band festival, like if that's how we keep doing this, then we might as well kind of kiss the whole thing goodbye, because like it'll only be a matter of time. At least in my experience in my region, I think music is, if you look at these schools in some of my area, you know, I'm in a diverse area of Seattle, but our music program is mostly white. And like there's reasons for that stuff. Like the students want something different, and so we have to adapt, and we have to hold each other accountable in that process. So just wanted to throw that out there, just something to think about.
So we've now officially gone longer than I intended, but I'm so inspired hearing all of you speak about these issues, hearing all of you talk about your students and the ways that you teach, hearing you all, like, your passion, um, your passion for this music, your passion for ethically representing it in your classroom. This is all a very beautiful thing, and it does my heart very good. And so I've just kind of been soaking it in here. But I want to close with one last question. Um, and let's imagine here, because we talk about this a lot. We pay a lot of, I guess, a lot of lip service to it. Um, but let's say our best, not our worst visions, but our best visions of what this music is and what this music can be and mean to people in our society. Let's say that is what happens in, oh, I don't know, 30, 40 years or something. What does that look like to you? What do you see in your mind's eye with regard to this music?
Um, I see more of the essence of the music incorporated into how we think about institutionalized educational music or like music education in our institutions. I see it being bigger than just jazz and being looking at, like if I teach a class that's called experience music, and like the basis of the class is literally like we just experience music. We listen. It's a music appreciation class that's not focused on like 19th century European music. And we talk a lot about, Black American roots, and we look at music history through the ages, and we always come to a pivotal moment where a new genre was born. And like you can take rock and roll, for example, and be like, oh yeah, Elvis Presley. You ask like, who's the king of rock and roll? And you're like, yeah, but have you heard of this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy? And so like we owe it, if we're talking about like American music education, the roots of this music need to bleed into to everything we do with how we teach music, because that's the reality of American music. Like you can't look at any, and same with Latinx influences. Like we have to bring all that in, and it has to become foundational to how we teach music across the board.
I think something that we haven't really touched on a lot is like this idea of like music exists for like building community. Like it's about playing with people, it's about playing for people. And that's really like at the heart of what this music is. Um, so I think like music education in its most like ideal form is just like somewhere where there's like a space for everyone, and kids are allowed to bring what they can bring to the table, and it's valued and respected. um and it's in like an encouraging kind space for kids. And um I think another big part of that is like leaving space for innovation and expression. So like kids writing music, kids, composing, arranging, in whatever like capacity that means for that kid. Um, and and improvising obviously is a part of that as well. Um, but I think like that those are some things that I would see, I guess.
I think I'd like to see two things. I'd like to first see jazz become authentic again, both in well, yeah, I'd like to see it become authentic again, and because I think it's important for I think it's important for the music to be represented in the way it was intended to be represented in, and I think a big part of that representation stems from who's representing it. So I would like to see um, more a more diverse group of jazz educators in our institutions. I'd like to see more women educators. I'd like to see more Latinx educators because there's a level of Latin jazz that cannot be understood, even by black musicians to an extent, because it comes from a specific culture. And that level of jazz is extremely important, even from when it was introduced, 60, 70 years ago. I'd like to see more black jazz educators. And I do want to make the point that creating space for new doesn't mean getting rid of the old. So this doesn't mean get rid of the old, the people who are doing it, rid of all the white educators. That's not what that means. What this means is let's make more space for more voices to be heard, and voices that, especially for this music, deserve to be heard.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at the scope of music education 30, 40 years down the line, I think it is a theme that we've talked about today is the whitewashing and the 90%. And that's flipping that statistic, narrowing the gap. That's something that I would love to see, not even that far ahead. Like we need to inspire students, and maybe my goal is never to make a bunch of music teachers, all right? And I don't think that's any of our goals, but we do want kids to experience music, find a way to express themselves, express their feelings, find a sense of community. And so it's tough. It's tough wanting to narrow that gap, but it's tough trying to narrow that gap and not wanting to push kids to do that stuff. But really, I think Maddie's point earlier was great about the essence of music, and that's community, building community, and seeing that 30, 40 years down the line, I think would be what I like to see too.
I guess I'd like to see us again, kind of hitting on Maddie's point. How can we build that community aspect? Also, I think that in all of my encounters with other jazz musicians and jazz educators, there's a tremendous amount of generosity, humility, willingness to learn from one another. And can we get that to generate out beyond our jazz classroom? Can we try to create an environment, because we all kind of try to create our own little world, where we've got that going on in our classroom, but can we make that attractive enough? Can we get that communicated outside the walls of our particular classroom, to get more people included, whether it's more students in the program or more people within the school community going, yeah, okay, so there's something going on down there. What is that? How can we tap into that? How can we spread that type of an attitude, where people are trying to learn from each other, people are supporting each other when they're taking educational risks, when they're stepping out in doing those types of things. So just how can we increase basically the benefits that each of us have gotten from the music, the communities that we've been able to be involved in, and the ways that our lives have been enriched? How can we have a greater reach out beyond just the people who are signed up for our class on a given semester?
Well, we've come to the end of our time together, an hour and 20 minutes later. I just want to thank everybody out there who's watching, but I also want to thank our fantastic panelists here, Mike Hammond from West Ottawa High School, Maddie Vogler from Stevenson High School, Rufus Ferguson from the Jazz and Creative Institute, Cesar Mendoza from Skokie District 73.5. Sees, you're going to have to talk to me about like how that works, having half a district. And last but not least, from Garfield High School, Jared Sessink. I really have enjoyed speaking with all of you tonight, and this has been a really inspiring conversation. So thank you all so much for your time, and I hope everybody has a great night.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.